the Worth Knowing live stream on my Substack, Worth Knowing with Matt Robison, and also on the Cliff's Edge channel on YouTube. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn. That's a lot going on. And we have a lot going on today, including the fact that it's election day with major races in Virginia and New Jersey, I guess New York City as well, local elections around the country. But we're not going to talk much about that. Why? It's not just counter programming, which is a good little media trick. It's also the dirty little secret. And as a former congressional campaign manager, I can tell you election day can be kind of boring if you're not one of the critical people doing the campaign get out the vote. There's just not really that much to do and not much to say. Yeah, so plenty to talk about tonight. Just not a ton right now. Instead, what I want to focus on today is deals. Now, later in the show, we've got the exceptional foreign affairs expert, Dan Perry, who is the former lead editor for the Associated Press, both for Europe and the Middle East, who just put out on his Substack a succinct review of everything going on in the world, really. And what I'll start off with him on is deals. President Trump just spent a week in Asia claiming that he made a bunch of them. But really? Did he? We're going to talk more about what's actually happening around the world, including in his trade war against the world, as the Supreme Court has a hearing tomorrow over whether Trump even has the ability to use these blackmail tariffs at all. And by the way, speaking of deals, I will just say here very quickly, and I'll try and write more on the Worth Knowing Substack about this. I'm hearing from my sources on Capitol Hill that there's a lot of rumbling under the surface in Congress about the shutdown. The latest word is that we are likely to see movement next week. That's the sense I'm getting. This is all on background. Can't reveal sources. It's just that that's where the discussions seem to be. They really started in earnest behind the scenes this week. Everyone's kind of catching up to the situation with the ACA premiums, the interruption in food assistance. By the way, is there a greater scandal in America than the fact that 42 million Americans need a helping hand with food? Fuck's sake. Anyway, the reality is that with all of this staring lawmakers in the face, there seems to be a little bit of traction, and that may be leading to a deal as soon as next week. By the way, in the world of deals, quick side note, I just want to announce that I've just sort of closed one. I just crossed the line into bestseller status on Substack. I really have all of you to thank for that. I thank you for all your support. I deeply appreciate it. I really just want to acknowledge all of you who subscribe, read, watch this live stream, listen on the audio pod, and show up in the chats every week. I really do appreciate you. And finally, on the topic of deals, I want to start today with a big one, a piece of politics that may have flown under the radar for you, for all of us last week, but it could be huge. All year, it's been looking like Ohio was going to be added to the tally of states, doing a Trump-driven dirty power grab. And the Republicans were trying to find a way to hand themselves 3 more congressional seats through another act of predatory gerrymandering. But then the commission there announced that they had reached a deal. So let's take a look at a quick piece of video summarizing the situation going on in Ohio.
Have a broken system of redistricting. I think that bears out in the testimony we heard today as well. It was not what the voters expected.
Some speakers accused state leaders of ignoring voters who in 2018 approved an amendment to end gerrymandering in Ohio.
Just because you can screw us and you can gerrymander these maps does not mean that you should do it.
Lawmakers call the latest version a compromise, but not everyone's convinced it's a fair one.
Are you afraid of allowing residents of the state of Ohio to have a fair election? One that allows us to pick our candidates and not the candidates picking us?
Under this proposal, the biggest changes come in District 9 in Northwest Ohio and District 1 near Cincinnati, both seats currently held by Democrats, but redrawn to lean more Republican.
This achieves a bipartisan resolution. This is not Republicans dictating it. It is Republicans picking up the Democrat votes that are needed.
Lawmakers say the compromise is designed to keep the map out of court and avoid a voter referendum.
One of the things that is most important is that as many people as possible live in districts that have competitive congressional races.
Now, the face you saw at the end there, the friendly face, is the face of rising Democratic star, possibly on the national stage, eventually, House Minority Leader in Ohio, Danny Isaacson. And he's with us right now. I'm not meaning to put the burden of future American leadership on your shoulders, but there it is. You have an august position in American politics. Welcome. Thank you so much for being on with us. And I'd like to hear more from you, kind of on where you left off in that piece of video. What's the significance of this deal? Why is it significant to voters outside of Ohio?
So first of all, Matt, thank you for having me. I'm very happy in my role here in Ohio, so we'll start there. But look, this is a big deal for the country. Republicans in states all over the country, Texas, North Carolina, Missouri, have been eliminating as many Democratic seats as they possibly could. As you noted, in Ohio, that would have meant going from a map that is currently has 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats to a map with 13 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Right? We've seen that happen all over the country. That we were shown a map that's what would have happened if we let this process go to November. So our goal going into the negotiations was, can we negotiate a map that keeps all 3 of the targeted Democrats in play in 2026? That was our red line. And this map achieves that. It's not the map Ohio deserves, right? We are a state that's 55-45 in state elections. That means we should probably have an 8-7 map. But we are in a super minority, and we are the only Republican-led state where all of the targeted Democrats are going to be able to compete in 2026.
I think that's a great succinct summation of it. And one of the great pieces of cultural heritage that I have had handed down to me as a Jewish dude is a deep ingrained sense that things could always be worse. It's one of the great gifts of my forebears. And it sounds like that's the summation of all of this here, is that the situation staring you in the face could have been much worse. And if I understand the mechanics of this, I don't want to go into the weeds. If you had not struck this deal, then it would have gone to a process that would have resulted in a situation that was much worse. So in a way, what you've done is you've gotten a hold of the best deal you possibly could, and it's preventing adding a lot more seats to the Republican tally nationwide.
Well, that's right. And think about the stakes here. Right? There are 1.4 million people in Ohio who, as of last Saturday, did not have their SNAP benefits loaded onto their cards. That's 580,000 kids who are hungrier today than they were last week in the richest country in the history of the world. That's a policy choice being driven by DC. So we have to take every single seat in the US House seriously, because the stakes are people being able to eat. The stakes are people's access to hospitals in rural areas, people's access to Medicaid, right? Those are the stakes. And so we don't get to mess around when we're talking about 1, 2, 3 congressional districts, right? And so that's what we went into the negotiation keeping top of mind, which is that this is going to matter tremendously to a lot of people's lives, and never more so than going into 2026, which is going to determine the fate of Congress for President Trump's last 2 years. And either we mean what we say about the risk of that, and we take it seriously, or we don't.
The reason I'm tabbing you for future national leadership, and I don't mean to put you in that position, I really don't. But what you just said, what you just did, is incredibly important for Democrats to pay attention to. You're talking about the stakes, not about the process, because the people who listen to and watch this kind of a show, they're pretty smart. They're pretty insidery. They're pretty high information voters. So they get what we're talking about when we talk about process, we talk about referenda, we talk about independent voting commissions. But the bottom line is, what is protecting our ability to elect Democrats who are the kind of people who won't allow 500,000 Ohio kids to go to bed hungry? That's what's on the line here ultimately. And that's, I think, the motivating factor that I hear in what you're saying behind making a painful compromise here. There's no doubt that there are trade-offs here. And I've kept this comment from one of our favorite commenters in the chats, week in and week out, Amethyst Peony. The point is to avoid letting people vote democratically. We need more binding referendums. So at the risk of getting into process weeds, I do want to talk a little bit about the background here and some of the criticism of the deal and give you an opportunity to address it. So in Ohio Capitol Journal, Mary Lou Johannick wrote, Ohio Republicans picked off 2 more congressional districts to gerrymander. This is not what democracy looks like. This is what partisan preservation over democratic representation looks like. On the other hand, the UVA Center for Politics summed it up like this. while the map does get better for Republicans, it's not nearly as bad for Democrats as it could have been. And Democrats still have a path to come out of this election with as many seats as they currently hold in the state. Representatives Marcy Kaptur, Democrat, Ohio 9, Greg Landesman, Democrat, Ohio 1, to see their districts get less Democratic, while Representative Amelia Sykes, Democrat, Ohio 13, sees her district get bluer. So let me just splash up a summary of what I just said. It was kind of information dense there in terms of what's happened here. But would you like to address the concern that ultimately what this deal does is it does kind of let Republicans who are in this position because of referenda in Ohio, where people overwhelmingly said, we want fair representation. We want a reflection of the state's partisan breakdown, which is a lot closer to 50-50 than, a 10-5, 13-2 breakdown of congressional seats would happen. What do you say to the criticism that, in a way, through this deal, Republicans are getting away with more gerrymandering?
So the criticisms are real and they're fair, and I share a lot of the anger and frustration. So I do want to address them. It's very important to me. But first, I just want to sort of put a finer point on what the deal was. And so this is a deal that takes Marcy Kaptur's district, and it does make it more Republican. Marcy Kaptur is the longest serving woman in congressional history. She is an institution and a stalwart in Northwest Ohio, and an incredibly strong member of Congress. And it's a district that in 2022, she would have won by 8 points. The new district. It's a district she would have lost in 2024. And so this is a district that she can win, particularly in a good, solid midterm for us. And if anyone can do it, it's Marcy Kaptur. They have been trying to take out Marcy Kaptur for decades, and you never, ever win betting against Congresswoman Kaptur. So it's a tough district, but I believe that she has a real shot at winning in 26. The other district that got more Republican was Ohio 1, which is my home district, Cincinnati, Congressman Greg Landsman's district. Again, an incredibly effective member of Congress, remarkably good constituent services. He represents the district very well. He overperforms by somewhere between 5 and 10 points as a new member of Congress, right? Like, that tells you a little bit about the level of respect that Greg Landsman has in all parts of the region. And so this is a district that Greg Landsman can and will win in 2026, just by a few votes. But he would have won it if he was the candidate in 2024. It's a district Joe Biden won. It's a district Sherrod Brown won. So it is a district we can and will hold. And then in Amelia Sykes' district, the district actually got more Democratic. So when you think about what happened in Texas and North Carolina and Missouri, right, mostly they went after districts with people of color in representation. And in Ohio, a Republican supermajority state, we were not only able to keep 2 of the districts within our ability to win in 26, but in one of the districts held by a Black woman who's another excellent member of Congress, she will not only preserve her seat, we have strengthened her seat. So that's what happened. But I want to address the issue of, well, why not let this go to a referenda? Why not, basically, because here's what the choice was. The choice was, let Republicans do their worst. We all know what that is. It would have been a 13-2 map, with each of these districts getting around 12 points worse, which is what the average in the other states. So putting them all way out of reach. And then saying, okay, let's try and raise the $15 million that it would take to do a referendum. You've got 90 days in the winter to get the signatures. That's great. You'll galvanize folks. But what people in Ohio, really smart people, what lawyers in Ohio, what lawyers in DC were telling us was that we can't possibly think it's a good idea to rely on Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose and Ohio State Supreme Court after what they've done the last few years, because they let a congressional map stay in place that was found unconstitutional 7 times. Right? Last year, there was a ballot initiative to try and overturn gerrymandering once and for all in Ohio, which is ultimately the only path forward. And they straight up lied on the ballot language. So we have no faith that even if we could raise the money, even if we could gather the signatures, that they would have let it happen. because we know that they don't honor the law here. So the choice that was before us was a 13-2 map where we galvanize energy. We basically say, do your worst, and we're going to fight you, on democratic principles. But the result of that is losing 3 congressional seats in 2026. That's the cost of going that route. So we get to maintain the moral high ground, right? We get to say, this is what Republicans do. But the result is the same as what happened in Texas, North Carolina, and Missouri, which is that we lose those seats. Or we could take a really hard vote. I could put my name on a gerrymandered map, which is what this is. But in exchange, we get to keep up to 3 congressional seats. And when the stakes are this high, we have to choose to be in the fight, not for moral purity or self-righteousness. And this is but to win power and to hold seats so that we can help people in vulnerable communities. That's our job. That is our highest moral calling. And we don't get to choose the other path because it feels good. And so that's what was facing us in Ohio.
No, I couldn't have said it better. And again, it brings me back to the point you made earlier that at the end of the day, this is about whether or not there will be the kinds of politically elected leaders in the state house in Ohio or in the Capitol in Washington who will not allow 500,000 Ohio children to go to bed hungry, which is the kind of choice that Republicans seem determined to make over and over again. I mean, President Trump just literally said, gosh, it's a shame that all of these 42 million Americans who need a helping hand with food aren't getting it. But, our hands are tied here. He needed to be ordered. And it's just the shame in that is overwhelming. But so is the lesson. So is the lesson. This is about practical politics. I know we've only got a short window, but I have 2 more quick questions for you. I was hoping, I've been a staffer in Congress. I've been a staffer in state capitals, and I've been inside a bunch of rooms where all the bullshit falls away. And the consideration that you just laid out for us, I was wondering if you could take us just a little bit inside the room where it happened, so to speak, and just walk us through. I don't want you to divulge any confidences that happen within a caucus or within conversations that may be happening with your Republican colleagues. But can you just give us a little bit of a visual of what is the conversation like? Is it like the kind of trade-off consideration that you just laid out for us? Are people kind of talking about, hey, here's the downside risk, here's what I'm afraid of? Give us a sense of the scene that goes into a deal like this.
The thing we had to do at the outset was set up our parameters, right? What are our red lines in the negotiation? And they were pretty clear. We have to have a situation where Marcy Kaptur, Greg Landsman, and Amelia Sykes all have a good shot at returning to Congress in 2026. Because fundamentally, and we said this very clearly because we wanted them to know where we were, the people in Cincinnati, Toledo, and Akron and surrounding communities deserve to have great representation. I could not stomach a situation where people in Cincinnati were drawn into a district with Southeast Ohio and Appalachia and had no shot at representative members of Congress. And that was the choice, right? To take the chance of representation away from people in Cincinnati, Toledo, and Akron. That is what they did in Kansas City. It's what they did in parts of Houston and San Antonio, and we weren't going to allow it to happen in Ohio if we could prevent it. So we made that really clear at the outset. And we said multiple times, if you're not comfortable getting to a map that lands there, fine. Then we have nothing more to talk about. So the most important thing we did in the negotiation was establish clear red lines. And then it just became a question of the math. Of how do you get there? But we had already done the prep work. We'd already spoken to members of Congress, to leadership in DC about what districts do you think you can win. Right? You saw the DCCC put out a statement right after the deal saying we are going to hold these 3 seats because they believe we can win them. Right? That's why Eric Holder put out a statement because Congressman Landsman and Congresswoman Kaptur are such strong candidates that we are going to be able to compete and hopefully win in both of those districts.
Let me get you out of here on this. Ohio pains me. I almost want to say, what the fuck, Ohio? I love you. I love the bellwether swing state you used to be. What happened? And most important to you, how do we get that back? How do we get back to a place where, we see a Senator Sherrod Brown again, and maybe in 2028, we see a Democrat actually not just like tying up resources by making Ohio competitive, but actually winning. Actually winning. Now, we've had former Ohio Democratic Party Chair David Pepper on the show several times. Talked about his book, Laboratories of Autocracy, his book, The Voter File, which is a voter file based political thriller. Yeah, those are words that don't necessarily go together, like jumbo shrimp or Democratic Trump, but there we are. His whole thesis is that what we really need to do is campaign harder in rural areas and cut the margins there. What would your take home be for Democrats in Ohio and around the country who may be in similar territory that we used to be able to contest and now we don't so much? What is the road back for Democrats to make places like Ohio competitive again?
It's one of my favorite questions because this is what animates me and the work of this caucus in the Ohio House. And then I'll tell you the way we talk about it. We start with the premise that 12 million people is too many to ever give up on. And so we will keep trying to find a way. And then, secondly, there is a way. We know there's a path forward. The path forward has to be a part of what David Pepper is leading, and he's doing incredible work with Blue Ohio, which is that we have to go into rural areas, particularly in Appalachia. And I do this regularly in schools and say to them that, I might be a Jewish guy from Cincinnati, but I give a shit if your kids can learn to read just as much as I do that kids in Cincinnati public can. And they're getting screwed and dealt an unfair hand in the same way. And so we have to be in that fight together for those communities, right? So yes, we have to do that. But if you look at Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan, incredibly similar demographics. And yet Ohio votes, somewhere between 5 and 10 points to the right of those states. Why? In part because the electorates look different. The people who are both registered to vote and turning out to vote happen at much lower rates in Ohio. And so that has been the case, over the last 4 or 5 cycles. And so we have to turn that around. It's most acute with young people. So we have to both lose by less and close the margins in Appalachia. We have to do a better job of registering and turning out young people to vote. And lastly, we have to be willing to play the long game because that's what they've been playing. And for us in Ohio, that means starting with breaking the supermajority. You don't go from the superminority to the majority. That is not, there have to be steps along the way. And so this is a cycle that we are laser focused on breaking the supermajority in the House. We're going to do it with a pro-public education agenda. We're going to do it with a pro-labor coalition because those are the issues that actually are major fissures in the Republican Party today, particularly in states like Ohio. And so we have to be in partnership with the folks who agree with us on the issues that can break apart, politics that are sort of overlapping across coalitions. And we're going to do that in districts that Sherrod Brown carried. If every district Sherrod Brown won in 2024 was held by a Democrat state representative, we would have already broken the supermajority. So that is the path, especially with Sherrod back on the ballot in 26. So our focus is we're breaking the supermajority. We're winning back areas of Appalachia. We're going to register and turn out young people. And it's not going to happen in 1 year or 2 years. It's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. And we're going to do it because there's 12 million people in Ohio who desperately need us to.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. And I want to say that I am trying to do my part for longtime listeners to the show. I go on the radio program hosted by Howard Monroe out of West Virginia, which is in the Ohio Valley. And I also come with a message of, look, I may be a Jewish dude from the Northeast, but I actually give a shit about your well-being. And I don't think the people that currently represent you necessarily do in exactly the same way. Well, look, thank you so much for being on. I wish you much success in your goal of eating that elephant one bite at a time, breaking the supermajority, and then going on to, come on, let's do it. We can do this. We can take back Ohio. Danny Isaacson, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right, we are going to transition to another segment of the show, and I am just absolutely delighted to welcome back my old friend, the former AP lead editor for the Middle East, Europe. I want to say Antarctica's in there somewhere. I think you have a penguin expertise going. There is not a place in the world, Carmen Sandiego, that you have not been the lead editor for the Associated Press for. Dan Perry, welcome.
Hey, Matt, good to be here.
I'm absolutely thrilled to have you. And I want to, you just did on your outstanding Substack. Oh man, while you're talking, I'm going to put the little tag for your Substack, but I hope everyone will subscribe to underneath your name here. I'll take care of that for you. Your Substack is called Ask Questions Later, which is a delightful name because it definitely suggests shooting first. It's the most American name possible. You couldn't have something more American if you put a piece of American cheese on top of a bald eagle. You recently put out an article that was essentially around the world in 80 seconds, kind of the stories going on. And that's really kind of what I'd love to cover with you. There is so much going on while we're internal navel gazing here in the US. And where I really want to start is President Trump is fresh off of a big trip to Asia, but is it big? He seemed to me to be doing a lot of his usual MO of announcing deals. He sees himself as the deal maker. He called his biography The Art of the Deal. He actually said when he got impeached, oh, this is interfering with my job, which is to make deals for the American people. It's not actually your job. Not actually your job, Don. But he sees himself as the deal maker. The whole justification for his worldwide reign of tariff terror on the rest of the world is, oh, I'm doing this to put pressure on to cut deals. So he announced a ton of stuff that sounds on first inspection like, oh, maybe he just made a deal. I don't think it necessarily holds up. What do you think? What came out of his Asia trip?
Oh, Matt, the main thing is that the trade war with China has been put off for like a year, and there's been some minor fixing of the tariff unpleasantness with China. But of course, none of the major issues were really addressed, and Chinese are not getting NVIDIA chips, and America is not really getting rare earths. And it's certainly enough to calm markets, and I suppose that's okay. But the very premise is flawed. Do you remember another U.S. president running around the world doing deals? Is that slightly not beneath the dignity of the office? The whole idea that he's going to punish foreign countries with tariffs if they don't do what he wants is infantile and stupid and ignorant of how tariffs work. Because if he slaps tariffs on a country, then it's the U.S. consumer and U.S. importers that pay that tariff. So when he goes around saying, well, I did these tariffs and I'm getting revenue, it's not revenue. It's internal revenue. It's insanity that people believe this and that the Democrats are letting the administration get away with this lie. I literally cannot believe it. I think it's, I don't know, a conspiracy against the Democratic Party and against people of the U.S. that the Democrats are allowing this lie to continue to fester. And no one's challenging it. It's beyond all belief. But of course, yes, it would suppress international trade. Clearly, because Americans don't want to pay higher prices, not because the Chinese or Canadians don't want to pay tariffs. I don't know what to say except to hope against hope that Supreme Court of the U.S. is going to grow a pair, basically, and let the president know that he doesn't have tariffing powers. That sits with Congress. And the workaround is for specific industries in specific countries at specific times in specific circumstances that constitute a national emergency. Now, I want to see the Supreme Court validate the idea that if the province of Ontario in Canada puts up an ad that references Reagan saying accurately that he believes in free trade, and this annoys Trump, that's a national emergency that justifies Trump seizing Congress's gift of tariffs and slapping more tariffs on Canada, meaning a tax on the American people. If they do this, then it's a little bit game over for America being a not banana republic. And I let me throw it back to you. I am suspecting that the Supreme Court under Roberts, despite everything that we know about it and having given Trump immunity and all the rest of it, will not sink this long and will put a stop to it. Am I naive?
You are the least naive person that I know and have had on this show. You are a realist who has traveled the world seeing the incredible cruelty, stupidity, and banality of the human race. On this issue, I am deeply concerned. I think that
I know.
this
I
seems like an
understand.
right. I am not a legal scholar. I've had Glenn Kirshner on the show. I've had Kim Whaley on the show. I've had Joyce Vance on the show. I've had some of the top legal scholars in America on the show. And I've put this question to them, and they're not confident. One would think that after their ruling about the major questions doctrine, which they invented, does not appear in the Constitution, but they invented this idea, cut from whole cloth, that there are major questions on which the president cannot act without express authorization of the Congress because they reach some kind of a mystical Potter Stewart-esque, I'll know it when I see it level of profundity. One would think that a worldwide war against all countries and the penguins in that uninhabited island, which you also were the lead editor for the AP for. One would think that that reaches a major question. One would think that this is a judicial layup, but I don't have the confidence in that. Now, if I were a gambling man, I'm going to do Southern Country Lawyer for a second. If I were a gambling man, I would bet that they would find a narrow means with which to gum up the works on Trump's tariff authority here.
Would that be good enough?
It would be, it's like the former congressman and vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party, Jack Kemp, used to say, and I'm fond of quoting, weakness is provocative. I think it would be a finger in the dam, and I think it would invite further provocation from Trump. He would find workarounds. He would find ways to kind of undermine the judicial ruling. But if I had to bet, I think that's where this is going. They're going to find a narrow basis to slow Trump's roll. I can't invent what it would be. That's my 2 cents. You?
I think you're being both a realist and an optimist, oddly, because obviously to assume the Supreme Court will do anything good right now is optimistic seeming. But I think we both agree that simply to validate the madness is problematic, no matter what, because however mediocre some of them may arguably be, they're still jurists. They're not clowns in the fullest sense, at least not a majority of them. So it kind of seems they got to do something. And I tend to agree with you. It'll be, rather than to strike it down as would be right and just and legally justified, I think they'll find a workaround or a way to gum up the works. And like you, I don't know what it would be, but I suspect they'll find one. They're jurists. Because they know that this is wrong. They probably also know that this is hurting America, you know? It's weird. Here's a proposition for you. I have a question. And let me bring it back to Dick Cheney. You know, I was just on another channel, broadcast channel, talking about Cheney. And boy, is that weird, because we thought that Cheney's legacy would be being the face of the Iraq War, and you know, having justified the Iraq War on multiply false grounds, the invented intelligence on the weapons of mass destruction, the fantastical connection to Al Qaeda, which Saddam Hussein, while being a terrible, awful person and a massively brutal dictator, didn't actually have, resulting in a war that was not a big success, let's just say. Um, you would have thought that would be it. You know, case closed about Dick Cheney, plus the shooting in 2002, plus the Nixon.
Oh, for our younger viewers, this is Dick Cheney's "shot my friend in the face" gate, where he, quote, peppered a good friend of his in the face with a shotgun. And the Bush administration was like, yeah, that's fine.
What you gonna do? Anyway, you know, but here's the thing. We missed the Bush administration because it turns out in the fullness of time, that was not his only legacy. In the fullness of time, here we are in 2025, and as I watch videos of Dick Cheney 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I'm hearing an articulate man who's a worldly person and not unsophisticated, who may have disagreed with me on many things for sure. But we shared a belief in the American system, American institutions, America's somewhat singular role in the world, and being forced for good and promote democracy. I understand you can be cynical even about that. I choose not to. Because when I see the current leadership of the US, ignorant, quite inarguably stupid, disdainful of the institutions that made America great, hateful towards America's role in the world and in preserving and building basically the liberal international order that followed World War II. And I say liberal purposely because the word has been distorted. It's been distorted. These days, Americans think transgender bathrooms is liberal. Liberal means something else. Liberal means a belief in freedom. Liberal means free markets. Liberal means individualism. Liberal means a system of government that has checks and balances and rights and guarantees, and where the government can't just arrest you because your name is Matt if they decided. Um, Cheney
Good thing I'm
believed in
part
all
of a
these things.
demographic outpouring of Matts. It's going to be hard to track me down.
I know. You guys, we got to look into you guys. Cheney believed in all that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, Cheney was closer to you and me than he is to Trump, and the proof is in the pudding. He voted for Kamala Harris. Amazing. So,
Amazing.
so Cheney represents the incredible mutilation of the Republican Party under the isolationist, populist, and truly deeply idiotic MAGA movement. So, back to the Supreme Court,
Oh, yes, you have a proposition for me. I like being propositioned.
which that won't be me, but I have a friend. Um, it it is an open question which Republican Party is the Supreme Court because they are the Republican Party. Are they Trump or are they Cheney? That's the question.
Well, let's not forget that, Justice Roberts, we know a few things about him. These are breadcrumbs, they're not guarantees. We know that he's deeply conscious of preserving the court's legitimacy and its role
That's
in
right.
our separation of powers. We
Yes.
know that he's very, very aware that the eyes of the country are on the court. He's very concerned about the diminution of the standing of the court, and its ability to be that arbiter, the calling of balls and strikes that he promised to do when he was a nominee. We know this, and we also know that he does come out of that earlier era of the Republican Party. I just want to underscore your point for a second. Some of my mentors, when I was a graduate student at the Kennedy School of Government, were Republicans. One of my early mentors was Mickey Edwards, who was a lieutenant for Newt fucking Gingrich. Yes, he's legally had his name changed.
We can curse. We can curse
yes.
on your show.
Oh man, let it fly. Let it fly.
All right.
Mickey Edwards was a lieutenant for Newt fucking Gingrich, and yet he's a good man. He's
So basically, you're saying Roberts is just not a dick. That's what you're saying.
I don't know. I don't have a standing on his dickhood or not. What I have is I'm just kind of underscoring your point that look, I think Dick Cheney is fucking Darth Vader. Okay. I think, wait, what was the comment that was just up here from, here it is, the Cynthia Rice. Cheney was a snake. Trump is a wrecking ball for the grift. Yes, chef's kiss, 100%, my friend. And at the same time, I mean, so, like I said, some of my mentors, one of my mentors, and this is going to be my way of both answering your proposition and trying to crab walk our way onto a different topic. We're going to change gears here a little bit. Another one of my mentors was Bob Blackwell. That's a name that won't be familiar to most people. He is a member of the Republican foreign policy elite. He is a member of the establishment. He was part of George H.W. Bush's foreign National Security Council. He was.
We also missed George H.W. or just George W.
Gosh. Well, I mean, Bob Blackwell was ambassador to India under George W. And he was one of my mentors in grad school because he had a baseline of integrity. And I will tell you something, he's the one who taught me how to do foreign policy analysis, who taught me how to consider how to wend your way through the intricacies of a nuclear confrontation, how to consider, first and foremost, what are the compelling national interests of the United States when analyzing any foreign policy situation. And it is from that platform that I would like to jump over to talking about Donald Trump's interest in renewing nuclear testing.
So it is completely indefensible because the ways to simulate what they need to simulate to develop weapons and to maintain our edge are quite credible. I'm pretty sure. I'm certain that this was a response to Vladimir Putin's test of long-range missiles, and he wants to show who has a bigger one. It's just so emblematic of the farce of the danger, of the farcical danger of having put in office a person so stupendously ignorant. But the wonderful thing is the short attention span, the fact that he said it so it exists and now I can move on. And I do believe that even though in this administration we don't have the Tillersons and the Kellys and Mad Dogs that stayed his hand in the first administration, there's enough, and I think he's backing away from it at this point. I could be wrong, but my sense is that's where things are going.
Well,
and it's a good thing.
The Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who I could not pick out of a lineup, to be honest. I just assumed that, it would be like an actual police lineup for most of the members of the Trump administration. He did clarify that when they talk of further testing of nuclear capability, he doesn't want to actually blow anything up. There will be no explosions, he says. So maybe that's his way of subtly, without undermining the boss and getting himself deported to a foreign gulag, saying like, well, maybe the boss got out a little bit over his skis. I do want to address the comment here in the chat from Jim Williams. No, wait, wrong comment in the chat that I just popped up there. See, technology is getting me. Here it is. Bush 41 and Cheney were thick as thieves. Change my mind. I will not. You are 100% right. And look, I don't think either of us are defending Dick Cheney, the Prince of Darkness, even before he shot his friend in the face.
That's not the point.
And certainly anything having to do with George W. We're just saying that it used to be even people who we would disagree with. We would disagree in a very, very different way. They had a fundamental respect for upholding the institution of democracy and rule of law.
They were not un-American. The MAGA movement, ironically, given what the initials stand for, is un-American.
Yeah.
We could have disagreements. I mean, I used to have to hide it a little bit as a journalist. I mean, everyone has a political opinion, and you basically suppress it and don't discuss it. These were obviously my political rivals. There was actually a point, I knew a potential political donor who would joke about bankrolling my campaign for junior senator from Pennsylvania. Not that that's in any way realistic, but yeah, it was very clear that I would be a Democrat. So these guys were rivals, but they weren't enemies of my country.
Right.
Yeah. And you look at the MAGA movement, and it sort of seems like maybe, yeah. And this is weird.
Well, let's get to that because there's a comment here from Amethyst Peony. that essentially the Trump administration, the MAGA movement, want to create a racist fantasy land based on false and whitewashed beliefs about history. Well, may I introduce you to Donald Trump's? You're right, and may I introduce you to Donald Trump's recent statements about his threat to go guns ablazing to Nigeria for the supposed persecution of Christians. Now, look, this
You're killing
is
me.
this is bullshit. I want to be clear, and there's there's a terrific report in the Washington Post from which I have unsubscribed because Bezos. But there is
Well,
a good
yeah, because
report
Bezos. Absolutely.
just laying out, and there's another one from Bloomberg laying out that yes, there are acts of political and ethnic violence that are hitting Christians, but it's the Muslim regions in Nigeria that are being hit the hardest. This claim of a genocide against Christians is on the order of Trump's earlier claim that white South Africans were somehow the victims here and needed to be admitted to this country to be
You
free
know,
from persecution.
you see the connection, don't you? I'm
Oh,
pretty sure
I
he
do, but
thinks.
expound, my friend, expound.
I think he thinks the Christians are white, and it's a dog whistle for the white supremacist
Oh.
base. For real, I'm not kidding. By the way, I also think, because you see him focusing on crazy people from Latin America, I think he thinks that when people ask for political asylum, they are coming from an insane asylum. I think he thinks the
Oh,
word
you think he's
asylum
confused
connects.
by the word? Well, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I really do. I'm
Do
pretty
you
sure he
think
thinks the Christians are white because Christians are white, aren't they? Yeah.
do you think he wants to admit all those people from the Netherlands because he thinks they're from the nether regions and it's like these doodles for Jeffrey Epstein?
Too much, but I wouldn't rule it out.
I wouldn't
Look,
rule it out either.
it's just
And
crazy.
look, I don't want to lose the thread here. Cynthia Rice is making a point. Look, this all started with Newt. He made Democrats out to be enemies. Let me just do 30 seconds on this because you are so right. I did a video about it. Someday I'm going to unearth it. I did it on Cliff's channel, on Cliff's Edge. I might have to unearth it and put it up on Substack. You are so right about this. And again, this is sort of part of my point is that embedded in the wave that started with Newt Gingrich in 1994, there were still people who you could respect, agree with, learn from, like Bob Blackwell, like Mickey Edwards. There were people with integrity in the Republican
Yes,
Party.
they were.
And
They were. They were.
I still think there are some of them who are putting up a fight. And I've had them as like panelists and co-hosts and guests on the show. Matt Wiley, who
Now you're going too far. The
you don't
reason
think
why
there's
all
anyone.
this, I don't know if there's no one, Susan Collins, whatever, maybe a little tiny bit, but it's a collection of craven and cowardly lemmings and sardines over there. I mean, and you know what? I met George H.W. when I was living in Puerto Rico briefly at an event. He was already post presidency. We sat down a little bit. We talked. He was obviously not a bad person. It was clear that he's not. I met John McCain about a decade ago in Italy at an event where he showed up with his fellow Mavericks, the lickspittle Lindsey Graham and Joe Lieberman, and I interviewed him. If you go to my Substack and look for John McCain, you'll see a pretty funny story about that interview because I pissed him off. But he was clearly not just not a bad man. He was sharp, and he was smart and courageous and weirdly in a gruff way charismatic. I liked him, right? You
Mm.
look at the current crop in Congress and in the administration, it's a mutation. It's an abomination. So, you know what? Here's a theory I've heard um recently expressed by people who know. Yeah? Because you know that sometimes, I mean, you know better actually, because you were on the Hill, but you talk to people and it's not for public consumption. So I've heard it said that, of course, these cowards are all waiting for the midterms in 2026. Yeah, to not be primaried. But after that, there are enough Republicans in the Senate will be open to convicting Trump that he'll be removable from office. Now, I don't know what that number is because we don't know how many Republicans will be in Congress. I think right now in the Senate, I think right now it's 53, is it? So you'd need another 12 or 13. Who knows what it'll be in 2026? But some sufficient minority of the Republican caucus in the Senate will be prepared to remove him from office, and we end up with JD Vance. Now, would they really be? I don't know, but this is the assertion, and the assumption is that there will be no shortage of impeachable offenses because, like everything he does, is not everything. So many things are maniacally crazy and clearly illegal. So we shall see. I think this may be tested in early 2027. What do you
I
think?
would be very interested. Look, that theory is something that our recent guest, Greg Oliar, who I know a lot of our audience
Yeah,
follows and
I do
is a
too.
great guy. He's a very interesting writer. He had laid out a case for what he called, I think he called it the easy 12-step plan to get rid of Donald Trump. Um, and look, I hope he's
That's
right.
an internal contradiction, but okay.
Yes, exactly. I don't I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I look for any number of reasons, and I'd say the thumbnail version of it is what we've seen in the Republican Party is the power of a leveraged buyout. You see this in the business world all the time, where a company
Interesting
has
analogy.
a
I like it.
3% share in a holding company that holds a 20% share in another company that holds a 51% share in the company at the bottom.
Well,
And
listen. So can I just say, so true.
hmm,
I don't think there is a significant corpus in the American body politic that wants the progressives, but I do think that the basic values we're talking about, which are really American values, are shared by a vast majority of the public, and the proportion of people that want this madness to happen, all of it, all of it, from eviscerating American soft power by killing USAID, to destroying food stamps, to like dismissing our allies. This entire edifice of insanity is supported by a tiny, tiny minority.
that's
But
right.
they fooled a slightly bigger group, which is roughly the 1/3 that still backs Trump, and they've somehow leveraged all of this into controlling every one of our branches of government.
Well, they have,
It's
and the
nuts.
mechanism is essentially the power of the leveraged buyout because they have a controlling share essentially of the Republican Party. The difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, for those who want to make a false equivalence between what they perceive as the excesses of the MAGA movement and the excesses of the progressive left, there is no equivalence here, people. There is no equivalence, for one thing, because the progressive left actually believes in the continuation of the republic and respects the rule of law. But for those who want to draw that false equivalence, what they're missing is that the progressive left does not have the hammerlock of that leveraged control in the Democratic Party that the MAGA right has in the Republican Party. And for Republican candidates, what they see on their landscape, look, it's election day as we record this right now. People are going to the polls. We've been talking about it in the chats. And what you do as a campaign manager is you come up with vote goals. Okay. Let's say your friend who wanted to bankroll you to become the junior senator of Pennsylvania had convinced you, and you had come to me because we had known each other at the time. And you'd said, Matt, you're an experienced campaign manager. Will you run my campaign? The first thing I would have done is I would have assembled a set of vote goals for you. I would have looked at the historical voting patterns and I would have tried to decide, based on a projection of turnout in the upcoming election, what is the number that would get you to 50% plus one that you need to win. And I guarantee you that every single Republican who runs for office in any state virtually in the country, not all, but most of them, 95% in any state or any district, the first thing they look at their vote goals is, if I break with Trump, what do I lose? And you can't make the math work if you're a Republican. This is not to excuse them. This is not to excuse their total lack of courage and the spinectomy that they have all undergone in the last
Because
10
they know
years.
it's wrong.
because they know it's fucking wrong. They know it's wrong. It is just to explain why I think it's unlikely that the Olear scenario or this, Trump will get impeached post 2026 midterms will play out. Because I still think that the math is the math, and it is hard to run as a Republican in America right now and break publicly with Trump. Now, once he's in a total lame duck state, once it is crystal clear that he's not running anymore and the bad man can't hurt you as much, things may dissipate. They may creep a little bit, but a wholesale rejection of Trump and impeachment, I don't see it.
Look, I'm not saying the majority of the party would do it, and I'm not even saying I think it's actually going to happen with a few Senate votes to make it happen. But it's interesting to me that people don't think it's inconceivable. And obviously, it depends on how many Republican votes you need and how badly maybe they get thrashed in 2026. Given what I see of the incompetence of the Democratic Party, I'm expecting them to not get thrashed, even though they should. The basic math, I think, is simple. Let's say the country is divided 50-50, roughly it kind of is. On the right wing side, the 30% that support Trump are 60% of the Republican Party. And that's why all these cowards are so afraid. Meanwhile, the 1/10 to 1/6 that is progressives are a minority of the Democratic Party. Therefore, the Democrats are not yet controlled by their nuts, and the Republicans are. And you'd think that would create a movement by the non-nutty Republicans to the non-nutty Democrats, as indeed we saw with Cheney supporting Kamala Harris. And I think there's been a degree of that, but clearly and obviously not enough. Where it's going to go is just such an interesting question. And by the way, a lot of it depends on what happens tonight in New York City.
Mm, right. And I mean, that brings up an interesting point. Somehow we veered from around the world in 80 minutes to around the country in 80 minutes. But you know what? The country's in the world still. So we get to cover domestic politics too.
The
You're right.
U.S. is the world's essential country, man.
We are still the indispensable nation. And, I look, I think I've written about Mamdani before. I am not going to, when I had the former DNC chairman, Jamie Harrison, on the show, he said that the number one thing that drives him nuts is the way Democrats like to form a circular firing squad and shit on other Democrats as our first go-to move for trying to figure out how to move forward. I'm not about to do that. I am not a progressive, but I'm not going to shit all over Mamdani. I'm going to praise the fact that he has focused like a laser beam, like a shark with a freaking laser beam on its head and a bright smile on cost of living, halalflation, affordability, how hard it is to make it, not just in New York City, but anywhere. That's what's resonating about his campaign. I am not going to take a position on what Amethyst Peony is saying here, take away the political labels and 80% plus support progressive policies. But you might be right about that. I think the label,
I don't know.
and in a way, but I take her point that the label you put on it makes a difference. And I think people will draw the wrong lesson if and when Mamdani wins later today. It would be the wrong lesson to draw. It's like, oh, this is the ascendancy of the progressive far left. No, it's fucking not. No, it is the ascendancy of someone who is speaking to the pain that the American people are feeling and is doing so in a highly effective way, leveraging the power of new media. He's someone who has met the message and the medium, and he's a tremendously gifted politician. It is not about whether he's a socialist or not. I would argue that, if anything, that is a detriment to him, but it doesn't really matter. I just don't want people to draw the wrong lessons.
I think we're at a wonderful juncture where actually we might disagree just a little bit, because people agreeing on a podcast, how valuable is that? Obviously, I am extremely unhappy that Trump is the president and the U.S. has gone in this way. Matt, I blame the progressive movement. I know a lot of regular people who are not completely insane or stupid or evil that voted for Trump. And every single one of them, even though in some cases maybe it's pocketbook issues, they all blame the progressives. They all say I couldn't take the wokeness, I couldn't take the cancel culture, I couldn't take the obsession with race and gender and behavior and propriety. It was insane. A world without humor. Uh, and we, I think, can agree the progressive movement went way, way, way too far, and they were just so far ahead of the public at large on transgender issues and on and on and on. And it got to the point where if you said well, look, the world is basically mostly men and women, you'd be canceled. So this freaked people out, and I am certain that it gave us Trump. So I'm not happy about them. Mamdani very much represents that as an avatar, and he's going to replace AOC as the avatar of that.
Yes,
Putting
he
aside,
showed up on her corner, and she can't be that thrilled about it.
yeah, so putting aside the Israel obsession, which should be irrelevant in New York City, even though there's a lot of Jews in New York, putting aside that issue, um, it is very problematic, and I actually wonder about Trump, who is making a good show of pretending that he would rather Mamdani not get elected. He's arguing against Mamdani. He supports Cuomo now. It's hilarious because if I was Trump, I would want Mamdani to be elected
You want the
to
poster
give me a
child for your
boogeyman.
opponents
Yeah,
that you believe. Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Look,
But there's something else. There's something else that just needs to be said.
yeah,
I have lived in London. I've lived in New York. I've seen these countries. Sorry, I misspoke, but they kind of feel like countries. These cities that are like city states within countries become so unaffordable to most people. You know, you could argue, look, if you're not making a shit ton of money, then you just have no business living in London or New York. And that might work if all the people left immediately and you only had bankers, but they didn't. And this reflects a rebellion by regular people who can simply no longer afford to live in New York. And that's fascinating to me. And I know it reflects, it highlights something true around the world. These world cities are unaffordable to their people. And is it
absolutely.
reasonable? Is it reasonable to take socialistic like measures to fix the problem? Freeze rents somehow, free buses and transportation, free schools maybe, private schools that are really good, maybe public schools as good as private schools. Because the people who are poor are not necessarily greengrocers. A lot of them are journalists and teachers, you know, who have aspirations that are intellectual aspirations, and they can't afford to live in their city. It's insanity, and they're rebelling in this way. And then the question becomes: are all these policies that Mamdani is proposing, essentially socialistic policies, in any way reasonable? Might it work? And as someone who has covered the collapse of communism and has seen this happen in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, where, yeah, just because it sucked to pay money for stuff, stuff was free, I can tell you that quickly resulted in a shortage of the free stuff. It didn't work. And I strongly suspect that Mamdani's policies in New York City will not work, whether it's city funded groceries and supermarkets or the free buses or the rent control or all the rest of it.
I will say though, and this is my attempt to offer a little bit of a synthesis of some of what you've been saying and some of what we're seeing in the chats. It's often said of Trump that you need to take him seriously, but not literally. Now that's a heap of bullshit in a way because some of the stuff that he's doing, like once you've bombed 15 boats off the coast of Venezuela, you have to take him literally and seriously. He's unhinged. However, when it comes to
Parenthetically, he dragged 1,000 heads of the U.S. military at great expense
oh
to
my
you
gosh,
and me to Virginia so that Hegseth can tell them they're too fat, and he can say that the real enemy now is the enemy from within.
look,
And if
my
she
point about
fits, because let's be a bit of a misogynist, because that helps us with the base, or misogynists, I guess, then you hit her. This is craziness, right?
absolutely. And so when it comes to Mamdani, I think I think it applies a little bit more. That idea of taking him seriously, but maybe not always fully literally. And for one thing, here's a commenter in the chats with an awesome handle, Kinky Streets. It's literally all commentators don't understand. New York City has a city council. Mamdani can't control it all. You moron. I don't know who the moron is, but gosh, is it me? Might be me. Look, you're right. You're absolutely right. And this is what I mean. It takes me back to what Bill Bradley used to say when he was running for president. He would say, I'm going to try. Here's the problem. And I'm going to try a little bit of this. And I'm going to try a little bit of this. And I'm going to try a little bit of this. Okay. Of course, Mamdani can't have city-run grocery stores. That will not practically work. Of course, he cannot offer $30 an hour minimum wage. Per Kiki Streets' point, there is a city council for such things. That's not going to happen. Of course, we can't have free public transit. It would not work. There are gobs of expert commentators in the pages of the New York Times explaining, hey, here's the economics of this. It won't work. But I don't think that's the point. I think the reason he's so wildly popular is sharks with frickin' laser beams on them. It's because he is saying illustratively, I would like to try this. I would like to try this. I am so focused on your economic pain and the fact that you cannot afford to live in this city that I'm going to try everything. I'm going to think outside the box. I care and I am focused on your issue.
I agree. That's true. And I'm conceding that this is an issue that resonates not just in New York, but in a significant proportion of the great world cities where the same thing has happened. And so I get it. I get it for sure. But my concern is that in the grander scheme of things, this gives Trump a gift. And let's understand what he's going to do. He's going to therefore seize on this to withhold federal funding from New York City, to try to send ICE and the National Guard and all the rest of it to New York, to create a conflict between the federal government and the city government, with the state looking on in impotence probably. And it's going to be very ugly and create a news story for the next 2 years. And its purpose will be to galvanize voters all over the country, in particular the heartland, against cities on the coast.
Right.
And it will help them demonize the cities.
Yeah. Right. Cities run with someone with a Barack Hussein Obama style name and skin that's a little bit darker. That yes, I 100% agree.
So you'll forgive me if I don't look forward to giving Trump this gift.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and he would not be my favorite candidate, but I'm just acknowledging that there is a lesson here. This is a point Cliff Schecter's been making on his Substack. There is a lesson here for Democrats that maybe it's not so much about the ideological label. Maybe it's about getting right the basic proposition of saying to people, I'm not like some culture warrior who's like in this who is making the point like 0.01% of the population that's trans and trying to figure out pronouns. I don't give a shit. I'm here because you can't afford your groceries. You can't afford the gas to put in your car. You can't afford to ride the subway. And I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to try a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I think the challenge, this is my attempt at synthesis. You ready? Here we go. I think the challenge for Democrats is there's a debate. And I'm writing about this right now. I got into a little back and forth with Elliot Morris, former lead polling guy for 538 and for The Economist. We got into a little back and forth this weekend about the question of, does the Democratic Party need to moderate? Now, I happen to believe that the answer is yes, but there's a big but after that. And I'm writing my case up now. The challenge for the Democratic Party is to do that without throwing our progressive friends under the bus or any targeted communities under the bus, because the lesson of 2016 is progressives may not have the Democratic Party. How did you put it? The nuts don't have us. They have us by the nuts. They may not have the same leverage.
The nuts are not in control.
That's it.
Which they are on the GOP side.
I knew nuts were in there somewhere. They may not have the same leverage over the Democratic Party that the MAGAists have over the Republican Party, but they control a critical voting share that Democrats need if we're going to stop the
they can't just like check out and not vote. That would be disastrous for Democrats,
right.
Of course.
And the reason that Hillary Clinton lost Wisconsin in 2016 is all of the Bernie Sanders voters.
Yeah, well, the Greens, the Greens, basically.
That is the reason. And again, I say that not to blame, but to say, okay, we need to listen. We need to find a way to moderate so that we're not scaring potential voters who think like, you're all about pronouns, therefore they, them. We need to find a way to moderate in that way without throwing our progressive friends or any communities that
I
are
think
vulnerable under the bus.
I think it depends on the definition of throwing under the bus. To not make transgender bathrooms the central pillar of your campaign as one of two major parties in the world's essential nation doesn't constitute throwing a vulnerable community under the bus. It just means you sort of have a perspective on the hierarchy of importance in life. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is in my view. And the Democrats got dragged into a direction that has hurt the world badly because of the consequences. And I fear that a Mamdani election, which seems likely, will help the Republicans more. And so I'd like to see the Democrats moderate, much as you do. And I think there are ways to do it without throwing anyone under any buses. Can
I
I
agree. I agree.
can I say something totally provocative though?
Sure.
Trump is right about the filibuster. No other country on earth has a filibuster. The idea that for any serious legislation you need 60% of the major parliament, which is the Senate.
Oh, we lost Dan Perry. Tarnation. That's difficult because he's coming to us from afar. Well, I'm going to filibuster a little bit here for a second. First of all, a shout out to Elizabeth 777 for quoting Dune. Fear is the mind killer. Yeah, look, I'm not. I hear what people are saying here that, like we can't go running in fear of being called socialist because they're going to call us socialist no matter what. But I don't think we need to lean into it either. And my argument would be, I think there is a way to take, I'm not just trying to be Pollyanna about this. I think there's a way to take the lesson that Zoran Mondani has given us about how to speak to people in real terms and using the power of the tools we have available to us these days to focus in on their economic needs. I think there is a unifying economic message that the Democratic Party can get back to. Because make no mistake, Donald Trump's core message is fucking stolen from us. He had whatever little bit of wit connects two different neurons in his brain. There's a synapse in there somewhere that recognized maybe it was a perverse gut instinct. One thing that he was right about, which is this sense on the part of many, many Americans that they're fundamentally getting screwed. This is one of the things that I have written about that I'm sort of proudest of. I wrote it in Newsweek. I reprinted it on Substack. And it's the economic story of America over the last 4 decades, 5 decades. A series of changes in the way the global trade system essentially, starting in 1971, eventually snowballed into the middle class and the working class in America getting screwed by trade. And there was an increase in immigration. This is a fundamental thing that Democrats would like to stick our fingers in our ears about and pretend is not a factor. It is a factor. It's a factor. And I've sourced that from liberal think tanks. That's one of the side effects of NAFTA, an increase in immigration. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it had a profound impact on people who work for a living, people who have lower educational attainment and lower income level to begin with. It's wiped out vast swaths of employment, especially in manufacturing. And that built up into an astonishing level of resentment. Now, look, my first job in Congress was for a member of Congress from Maine. He never went to college. He was a mill worker for 28 years. And he got elected in 2002. 2 days after he was elected, his mill, his paper mill that he'd worked in for 28 years was shut down. And all of his friends in his hometown lost their jobs. And what's interesting about that congressional district, there was a study that some economists and political scientists did that showed that in congressional districts that had been most subjected to these kinds of forces of trade, job loss, outmigration, suppression of wages, if they had been majority white or somewhat Republican leaning in the 2000s, they all became Trump districts. But if they had a higher proportion of minority voters, especially black voters, or had been Democratic leaning, they all became Bernie Sanders districts. And so the point is, and the insight that Trump developed was that this is the fundamental story that people were facing, and they were open to fundamental change. They were open to what Bernie called a revolution, what Trump called the whole system is rigged and you're all getting screwed. And he offered a dark, violent, blame minorities, blame immigrants, angry version of that. And it happened to prevail. But just to bring this all back full circle, the challenge for Democrats is that that fundamental story is still what's driving American politics. The median proportion of Americans who over the last 5 decades say the country is on the wrong track is above 70%. 70%. 75% of voters, and I'm filibustering and Dan's back, 75% of voters said in the run-up to the last election in 2024 that they thought the system was so broken and so rigged that it needed to be fundamentally changed or done away with. So here's my challenge to Democrats, and we've got Dan back just in time for me to try to wrap up the show, so that'll be fun. The challenge to Democrats is don't get angry at Zoran Mondani, the Democratic Socialists of America, AOC. Don't get mad at the progressives. There is a message that they are embodying, that Bernie Sanders had the insight to capture, that really resonates with Americans, that really that rhymes with that basic economic story of America, that is the story of the ruination of too many Americans' lives. We need to tap into that. We need to speak to it. Mamdani is doing that. That's why he's winning. That's why he's probably going to be the next mayor of New York City. And those of us who consider ourselves centrist, moderate, whatever the label is, mainstream Democrats, we can learn from that. And we can embrace that kind of message and that kind of thinking without blaming the progressives and throwing them under the bus. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's a layup. I'm just saying that's the challenge. I think we can do it. And if we do it, I think we can win with it. All right. That was my rant. Dan, I'm gonna bring you in for the last word because we gotta go.
Look, thank you. And I'm sorry to have been bumped by the system before. But here's my response to that. There are two versions of the progressive movement. The one that talks about the fact that life in New York City is unaffordable and too many Americans have been hit too hard by globalization, by digital disruption, and all the rest of it, and it needs a solution. Yeah, that's going to be effective, and that's probably net gain. The other part of the progressive movement that the Republicans have successfully managed to define as the core of the progressive movement is the race and gender and woke cancel culture excess, and that will not be a net gain. That's clear. Even if much of that is just, especially on race, it's not going to be a net gain for that to define the Democratic Party. So perhaps what is needed is a distinction between those two kinds of progressiveness. And I agree with you that Mamdani, who may in fact be both, is successfully running on the former. And that is a winning proposition for sure. And this is why Bernie Sanders was successful to a significant degree, surprising degree at the time, even running as Hillary in 2016.
I completely agree. And I'm going to close us out on Jim Williams' comment. Democratic Party has a big enough tent. It has to be in order to fight fascism. Look, we've had the luxury and the curse of having Trump as the opponent for the last 10 years. And that's welded us together. And so, again, I think the challenge here is, and my challenge to my fellow moderates is, how do we do this? How do we make the people in the chats, and I agree, Cynthia Rice, thank you for being here today once again. How do we make the people in the chats who are pointing out, like, hey, you know, this is a lot of what we believe and it resonates with the American people and people widely support it and we're not the problem here. How do we make the people who feel that way, who are part of the Democratic Party, feel great about continuing to be part of this party? How do we not throw our trans American brothers and sisters and any other definition that people want to embrace? How do we not throw them under the bus? Right? We don't want to be part of blaming them. And yet embrace the best of what our progressive friends have to say and make that the core of the Democratic Party.
Get better politicians, man. Mamdani's a great politician. You look at some of the older generation Democratic Party, including Hakeem Jeffries, these are not great communicators at all. So your wonderful centrist message that is inclusive, not progressive, but nonetheless humane, and in a very real way, in fact, progressive, that needs a voice. And by the way, I think it could be you and others like you, but it's none of the people that are currently running the Democratic Party.
All right. Well, you'll run for junior senator of Pennsylvania. I will run for assistant dog catcher of Massachusetts. I actually worked for a member of Congress who sometimes, for no fucking reason, answered the phone himself. And then people would ask, who's the flag coordinator? Because you can order a flag that's flown over the U.S. Capitol. That's one of the perks that you can get from your member of Congress. And he would respond, I'm just the assistant flag coordinator. So look, as the assistant flag coordinator for this show, I want to inveigh upon people. First of all, a belated thank you to Danny Isaacson. If you want to follow him in his budding career, I know he's saying he's happy being in Ohio. Look, you can see a rising star. You know a rising star when you see one. He is one. People can follow him on the website there. And of course, a big thank you to Dan Perry coming to us despite technical difficulties from across the earth. People should check out Ask Questions Later. You're asking a lot of questions now, man, and you've got more questions for later, which is awesome. And finally, I want to say a big thank you once again for people who missed this at the top of the show. I just crossed the check mark barrier. It's like the sound barrier, except less scientific and exciting. And I'm now a Substack bestseller. That's because of you. Thank you.
As well, you should be.
Look, I know. It's a digital pat on the back. It's a symbol. It's silly. But in a way, what it says is that people put some value on what I'm offering, and they like interacting with each other here on these live streams. And I appreciate being the host for that. And thank you, all of you, for your comments and your suggestions and your pushback and your criticisms and just engaging, which I find truly delightful. So I will see you next week. We've got another exciting show. I'm guesting on The Gist next week, which is going to be super fun. We've got a lot. Oh, and I've got a new show concept that I want to roll out. Oh boy, I've got a lot coming down the pike. So all of that coming up ahead. Thank you again, everyone. And in the meantime, till next week, stay safe, be well. See you soon.
Yeah, man.